A single rifle crack split the boardwalk noise, and Isabella flinched, watching a man go down between two neon reflections. Fear tightened her throat. She moved before she thought, stepping closer, because she had to know if he would call for help. Someone at the far edge of the pier turned and met her eyes. She saw the shooter breathe out slow, and for the first time fear changed to a sharp, immediate decision. Run. Within 3 strides, she realized the shooter had seen her running, too. Isabella's fear drove every choice in the next minutes. She bolted along the rain, slick planks, shoes clicking against wet wood, pearl locket beating against her sternum. Behind her, a voice barked. 2 men moved like trained animals through the crowd. She ducked under a vendor canopy and forced herself to keep moving, lungs burning, hair pressed damp to her neck. A neon sign hummed above, blue and pink streaks across her coat, and the waterfront smelled of diesel and salt. That sensory knot kept her from thinking beyond the immediate task. Get away. She was 26, heir to a small shipping line, used to careful decisions and polished surfaces. That background mattered now only because it told her where to run. Not toward the hotels, where faces would be known, but into the half-empty service alleys connecting the quay. She kept her shoulders hunched, hand closing over the locket, fingers tracing the cool edge of the pearl, a motion that steadied her. The local crowd thinned. The boardwalk lamps left slashes of light on the pavement. Every step carried the same question. Had she been seen clearly enough to be identified? An alley opened to a narrower pier, deserted except for the tidal graffiti and a single glossy car that idled at the water's edge. 2 men in dark coats stepped from the car as Isabella pushed herself into the open. She shoved past them without a word and kept running. One reached for her wrist. A gloved hand closed around her elbow. She turned and found herself facing a man who smelled of coffee and leather. Close behind him, another silhouette waited inside the car, motionless. "Stay still," the first man said. He used her name before she realized he knew it, Isabella Moretti. The sound of her full name in his mouth sharpened something cold in her. She tried to speak and found nothing but a dry rasp. He guided her toward the car with the same calm patience she had watched in chauffeurs as a child. When she was half inside, the other man lifted the back door and pulled her in. Inside the car, the world narrowed to tight leather, a warm engine hum, and 2 eyes watching her from the back seat. The man there did not introduce himself. He simply waited, head tilted, studying the scar near her eyebrow and the way she kept touching her locket. Isabella's mind flicked between hope and dread. She could have been rescued. She could have been taken captive. Her fear shifted again from raw panic into wary calculation. If this was abduction, she would need to memorize every detail. If this was protection, she would have to decide how much to trust the man who had just yanked her from the pier. Matteo Rinaldi, who had pulled her into the car, spoke without taking his eyes off her. "You're safe for now," he said. "You're with people who will not leave you on the pier." His voice was short, flat, pragmatic. He folded his hands like a waiting animal. "Tell us what you saw." Now, Isabella swallowed. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. "A man, by the old ferry steps, he was shot. I think he was alone. The shooter looked at me. He had a tattoo, crescent, on his wrist. I saw it when he reached for his gun, the crescent." Matteo's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "You sure?" She nodded. She could feel her pulse in her throat. She thought of the faces at her family's weekly dinners, the men who handled contracts and payments, the ones who laughed too loud in the clubhouses. Fear became suspicion. If the attacker connected to someone she knew, the danger would reach past the anonymous waterfront into her life. The car moved away from the quay under an expectant silence. Isabella mapped their route by small cues. The way Matteo's jaw worked, the smell of his jacket, coffee and motor oil, the soft clack of a radio hidden in the upholstery. She watched the back of the driver's seat and the man in the rear as if evidence could be found in posture. The man in the back finally spoke, low and precise. "You shouldn't have been there, Ms. Moretti. You saw something you shouldn't have seen. That makes you dangerous to some people," he paused, then added, "and valuable to others." Isabella realized the man had used Ms. Moretti like an assessment. It placed her on a map she had not chosen to be on. Her fear shifted again into a cold disbelief. Who were these people to decide what she was worth? She tried to pull her hand from her locket and found a gloved palm hover over it, protective, not desperate. The voice in the back was careful but did not offer comfort. When the car stopped, it was at a low, stucco house perched above the water, simple and shuttered, a private place a hurried driver chose when discretion mattered. Matteo opened the door and led her inside without question. The safe house smelled of cedar and lemon oil. A lamp cast a dim pool of light on a table strewn with maps. Isabella's hands were shaking so that the locket rattled. She kept talking because the sound of her voice tethered her to herself. Matteo sat her down and did not look away. "The man you saw belonged to a rival group," he said. "They will assume you saw faces. That makes the risk higher. If you testify to police, they will target you. If you disappear, your family will be blamed. The choice isn't yours alone." His words landed like a slab. He named concrete stakes: testimony, family, danger. He did not soften them. He moved like someone trained to weigh costs. Marco Santoro entered the room without ceremony. He had the presence of someone used to being obeyed. The room adjusted to him. His suit was charcoal, his hands bare for once, his jaw marked by a faint scar. Isabella noticed the way he paused by the window and looked out at the neon tide below, as if confirming what lay at stake. He did not smile. He did not need to. He two questions in a single breath. Did they see her face? Is anyone from her circle connected to them? Isabella answered, and in her answers she revealed a detail that stopped Marco short. The shooter had a thin crescent tattoo on his wrist. "I think he moves his cuff like that when he pulls his coat down. He did that the night my father's partner argued at the marina. I remember him from that meeting. He was leaning over the ledger. He laughed at something and his wrist was bare." Matteo's lips thinned. Marco's hand reached for the arm of the chair like a man steadying himself. The room shifted from protection to calculation. The danger had changed shape. It was no longer only a violent stranger at the waterfront. It might touch the circles Isabella lived in, the men who counted her signature on papers and who sat at tables that decided dock schedules. The fear in Isabella's chest turned into a hot, slow suspicion, doubt about each friendly face she had allowed close. "You saw him at a business meeting." "Marco." His voice was even. "Name him." She did. She the man's name aloud, the one she had only half remembered in the moment's shock. Marco listened, fingers folding the corner of a map. Matteo checked a phone, then nodded. The name linked the shooter to Isabella's father's world. That connection made the threat personal and immediate. The group moved into preparations. Marco assigned watches and routes, the kind of exacting division of labor that left no room for argument. Isabella watched him plan with the same attention she would have given to a lawyer drawing a contract. She felt trapped between the cost of her truth and the need to protect the people who could be harmed if she told the police everything. She had been careful all her life. This was the first time carefulness had not been enough. Her fear shifted into resolve, not brave, not grand, but a practical choice. Survive and protect what could still be protected. They ran scenarios at the safe house. Matteo questions that sounded surgical. "Who knew you would be on the pier tonight? Did you speak with anyone before you left?" Isabella answered each in short bursts. She avoided naming clients, places, or times that would widen the net. Marco interrupted once, voice low. "We will not hand you to the police until we assess the risk to everyone you name. We move first." The sentence was an order, and each syllable carried a promise and a threat. Days became a small, dense unit of time measured in checkpoints and small humiliations. Isabella slept on a couch, pockets of the room monitored, windows taped where necessary. She was permitted to speak to no one outside the house. Meals came in tidy boxes and were eaten at a table where Marco and Matteo ate their food with the same provisional politeness. Her world contracted to a room, a locket, and two men who watched her as if she were a live ledger with entries that could change their bottom line. Her hands learned new habits. Hold the locket when a knock sounded down the hall. Keep knees tucked when the house settled. Count the number of footsteps on the rooftop at night. These were physical reactions, not reflective statements. Each action was a small proof that she was still present and thinking. Once, when Matteo returned late and shut the back door with a soft click, he found her on the landing. "Isabella," he said, voice clipped, "Don't move like that. It draws attention." They argued twice in rapid, terse lines the second night after she arrived. "Tell me who else was at the meeting," Matteo demanded. "My father is not a target, Isabella, don't say that. He is now part of this whether you like it or not. Your father, don't say his name in this house." The exchange ended with a stale silence, and with Isabella realizing the stakes she had tried to hide were active, not theoretical. The clash brought a swift shift, from private dread to the concrete knowledge that her family would be involved. Midway through the week, Isabella found a small, decisive clue in a photograph Matteo had left on the kitchen table. A receipt from a private dock service with a time that matched her memory of the meeting. She pointed to the raffle of numbers and asked a question, and Matteo blinked as if he had not expected her to look. For the first time, she felt an agency return, not because she was brave, but because the house needed her details to survive. She wrote down the receipt's name and time and felt a small, bright relief. The emotional current shifted again, from passive fear into active contribution. The relief didn't last. A driver parked near the house at dawn. Its horn honked twice, a code. Matteo tensed and moved to the window. Marco came down the stairs and went straight to the door. Gunshots echoed on the pier before anyone could open the bolt. They moved as a team, smooth and practiced. Isabella's locket bounced against her chest when she ran ahead of them. She did not think about that motion. She acted. The safe house perimeter erupted into a short, violent scramble. Marco shoved her behind a stacked crate and placed a palm against the small of her back. Steadying her. "Stay down," he said. "Stay with me. Do exactly what I tell you." His voice lost the professional distance it usually held. It became immediate and very close. Isabella felt his hand press her shoulder until the wood scraped her coat. She could hear the rain on the roof and the rapid, metallic clicks of boots. Someone shouted names. Matteo called out positions. The firefight lasted 2 minutes that felt like every instant of her life colliding into one small, bright space. When it ended, someone shouted that the perimeter was secure. Marco lifted his head, wiped rain from a cheek, and searched Isabella's face the way a man seeks a pulse. "You're bleeding," he said softly. "Where did this come from?" She touched a cut along her palm and found it sticky. He took a handkerchief and pressed it to the wound, eyes steady. The gesture was not romantic, it was practical, precise. He checked for other injuries, for signs of shock, for the small things that meant the fight had a cost. They walked to the pier together afterward, where the water still glowed with the neon's reflected colors. Police lights painted the far end in blotches. The body was gone, taken by men who do not leave witnesses. Isabella stood by the rail and watched a gull pick at something on the water. Her locket was quiet against her chest. Marco kept his distance, but he did not leave her side. "You saw him again." Matteo, voice low. "No." Isabella kept her hands folded. Only the aftermath. Her voice did not wobble now with panic. It held a stiffness that matched the new reality. Marco nodded slowly and reached into his coat, producing a small leather case. He opened it and placed it on the railing. "A simple pair of keys. We can move you tonight," he said, "or you can tell the police what you know. Either way, someone will come for what they want. Decide." He looked at her like a man who expected a choice. Isabella moved her fingers around the locket. The choice felt less like freedom and more like a ledger entry. She thought of her father, of his meetings and his laugh, of the men who had once smiled at her on terraces. She thought of the photograph Matteo had pointed to and of how small details had changed the map of danger. Her fear narrowed into an intention she did not trust herself to name. "I will not go to the police tonight," she said. The sentence came out even, quiet. "I will give you what I remember about the meeting, and you will protect my family while you investigate." She heard the rationed logic behind the words. It was not a plea, not a vow, it was a trade. Marco's jaw eased fractionally. Matteo exhaled and looked away, then back. They accepted the terms. They started to make plans, keyed to the exact times on the receipt, the names in the ledger, and the crescent tattoo she had seen. Later, on the roof as dawn bled pale into the neon-stained sky, Marco closed a small, precise door behind him and placed his palm on the locket for one measured second before he set it gently on the ledge. "You will not go home for a while," he said. "We will protect what is yours while we trace this. You will answer questions. You will stay inside our plan." The statement carried a finality that replaced vague promises with an iron clause. Isabella watched him. The copper light of the coming sun skinned the water. She felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Before Marco turned to leave, he added one quiet line. "You are worth my attention." It was not flattery. It was assessment. Isabella felt something like ledger balance shift. The protection had a face, and the face had decided she belonged on its list. Outside, the city moved on in indifferent rhythms, ferries' morning shifts, an email arriving in a family's inbox. But inside the safe house, the terms of survival had been redrawn. Isabella tucked the locket under her shirt, held it in the same small way she had when the shooting first happened, and watched Marco go down the stairwell. Matteo locked the rooftop hatch with a soft click that sounded like a concluding stamp. In the distance, a car started and moved away, carrying with it the echo of decisions made in the night. The chapter ends with Marco placing the keys back in his pocket and telling Matteo to start tracing the receipt stock times. Isabella listened and responded with the specific name she had remembered from the meeting, the one that now tied the shooter to her life. That exchange closed the immediate fight and opened a new, concrete move. An investigation that would force choices from many people, not only from her. The roof door closed behind them and the dawn light slid across the locket on her palm, a small object that had, in fewer hours, shifted her world. Emotion root. Fear emotion shifts. Fear suspicion resolve active contribution wary acceptance. Two hands yanked Isabella toward a waiting car as neon stuttered on the wet boards. Fear tightened Isabella's throat and made her fingers clamp on the pearl locket at her collar. She had been standing on the pier because the man on the boardwalk had fallen after that rifle crack, the same violent sound she had watched in the previous night. And now strangers were forcing her into a vehicle. The central problem was immediate. She had seen the shooting, and someone decided witnesses could not be allowed to leave. She tried to pull free, let go Isabella, voice high and raw. Her coat fabric rasped under a rough grip. A second hand shoved her toward the open back door. Boots scraped the boards. The men did not answer. They bundled her past the car's sheen, past the rain, glazed chrome. The boss, a shadow in the rear seat, looked up and watched her with a measured silence. Isabella's background came forward in short facts as she moved. Daughter of a shipping magnate, 26, used to guarded entrances and polite lies at family dinners. She had learned to smooth panic into a smile at charity galas. On the pier, those habits did nothing for her lungs. She kept touching the locket on instinct, the gold chain warm with her palm. Fear drove the first decision. She stopped struggling enough to listen, because moving blindly would get her hurt. "Matteo, where were you standing?" His voice came close, clipped and impatient. Isabella turned and forced her eyes to his by the bench. She answered. Her words fell between the hum of the car and the slap of rain against the roof. Teo's hands were steady on the leather, not cruel but not kind either. He leaned in. His breath smelled of motor oil. Name, Marco, from the back. His voice was low, controlled. Isabella heard the faint clink of a watch against metal. Isabella Moretti, she said. Marco pronounced her last name as if tasting it. The car moved. Tires whispered through wet pavement. Inside that motion, interrogation became a rhythm. Teo short questions. Marco watched the way Isabella folded herself smaller. Isabella's fear changed into a tight concern for facts: who had fired, why, who had come for the body. She answered in fragments and the men filled the gaps with suppositions. He went down there. Teo, pointing outside the window, you saw him fall. You saw them. Do you know faces? Isabella held the locket against her palm and said, I saw a man turn and stare at me before anyone moved. I thought. She stopped. She could still hear the echo of the rifle from the previous night in her ears. It lived as a precise noise, not a metaphor. The crack, a small spray of blood on the boardwalk, the man's hand leaving a smear on the bench. That memory had decided everything. The men flinched at her description. Marco leaned forward a fraction and flicked the locket with one finger. His eyes narrowed at the pearl set against her collarbone. Where did you get that? He asked. Isabella's fingers tightened. It was my grandmother's, she said. Marco's face did not change much, but the angle of his head shifted. He was cataloguing details. Suspicion tightened him. He spoke with measured suspicion and calculation. The car stopped in a private garage. Fluorescent light cut the rain out of the world. Marco stepped out first and left orders for Teo. Isabella kept her hands folded around the locket. Marco's offer came without ceremony. Protection in exchange for silence and temporary custody. He laid out the terms in short sentences. You stay with us. You don't call the police. You let us handle whoever tries to finish this. Isabella's fear moved again, this time into a small, practical anger. She thought of her father, of how a police investigation could expose his company finances and her family's name. If I go to the police, my father will be dragged into this. Marco, she said, I can't let that happen. Her voice cracked on the last words. The pearl warmed under her thumb. Marco measured her. Teo watched her hands. You understand the alternative, Marco. He didn't bother to say it out loud. The implication hung in the light of the garage. Staying put could be safer than running. Isabella's choice tightened to a single line. Immediate protection under the control of a man she barely knew, or exposure with official procedures that might crack her family's life open. She agreed to the protection because choice required a base and the garage felt like a temporary roof. I'll accept temporary protection. The words were small, pragmatic, not triumphant. Marco nodded and ushered her into a sealed transit room. He made a note to himself. His expression softened a fraction, not from warmth but from the calculation of responsibility. Inside the transit room, Marco examined the locket carefully under a single lamp. He compared its clasp against a small, torn photograph he had taken from the dead man's pocket. Up close, the man's jacket label matched a shipping subcontractor who had worked for Moretti Lines. That revelation was the chapter's first twist. Isabella's family company had a concrete link to the victim. Marco's suspicion shifted toward protection. He less now and considered consequences. You knew him. Marco, holding the photograph out. Isabella stared at the face, a man in his 30s with a thin scar near his temple. No, she said, not by name. I saw him once at a dock meeting months ago. Her voice went flat when she spoke. She tried to place the man's face in formal situations, a cargo inspection, a supplier handshake. The detail made the danger narrower and deeper. Teo checked the transit room door on impulse, then barked a short instruction over his shoulder. Someone's near the pier. 2 cars idling. They should not be there. The report came crisp, and the room air changed. An external event had arrived within a few paragraphs, hostiles closing in. Marco's plan altered. He ordered a quick move toward the pier to intercept before the enemy could choose advantage. They moved in shadows and under neon reflection. Isabella followed, clutching the locket like a map. She watched Marco as he walked, broad shoulders under a dark coat, his jaws at scar catching the light. Matteo stayed one step behind, scanning exits. Isabella realized she was being used as a pivot. Information about her family linked to the dead man. She felt both expendable and suddenly essential. On the pier, the night tightened into immediate violence. 2 cars were indeed idling, engines low. Marco signaled Tio and a handful of his men. The air smelled of salt and petrol. An exchange began, voices flat, then a flare of metal. The assailants moved faster than Marco's men expected. A pistol cracked. Marco intercepted an attacker and threw his weight forward, shielding Isabella with his body. The scene became a ballet of movement and impact. A fist, a gun arm, a scuffed shoe slipping on wet wood. Bullets bit the wood around them. Isabella heard splinters pop underfoot. She blinked water from her lashes and saw Marco push her behind a crate. He shoved his coat over her shoulders with one arm while he took a swing at an incoming figure.
"Get down!"
Tio shouted, pushing someone aside. Isabella obeyed. Her hands went to the locket and kept it there. Adrenaline made her movements clean and automatic. The ambush brought the chapter to its climax. Marco's silhouette moved directly between the attackers and Isabella. For a moment, her fear compressed into one sharp sensation. The weight of him against her, his body absorbing strikes. He smelled of leather and cedar and the gunpowder that hung after each shot. He pushed, he shoved, and his right shoulder took a blow that left wetness on his suit. He stayed between the gunfire and her. A short melee followed, shouts, a thrown bottle, a sliding man who hit the pier rail and fell. 2 of the attackers fled after a sharp order from Matteo. 1 did not. Marco pressed his palm to the bleeding shoulder and swore in a voice low enough that it vibrated against Isabella's ear. "Stay close," he said. "Stay behind me." Isabella's fear converted to a tender, shocked gratitude, then to another wary thought. If Marco would take a bullet for her, what did that obligate her to him? They retreated into the shadow of the garage and into Matteo's quick hands. Tio tore open his shirt and pressed a clean cloth against Marco's wound. The boss went quiet in the hands of his lieutenant. He accepted the treatment with a stillness that felt personal rather than public. Isabella watched the precise movements, Tio's fingers pinching skin, the way he avoided looking the boss directly in the face. The care shown had the texture of habit, not romance. Survival practiced like a ritual. Isabella's emotions shifted again. From fear to fragile trust, then to doubt. She trusted Marco enough to let him cover her. She doubted how much of her life he now controlled. She touched the locket and remembered the specimen of blood she had seen on the bench the night before. That memory carried a new weight because it was now part of a chain. Her family's contractor, the dead man, Marco's men moving to intercept. Connections condensed into a dangerous knot. Marco spoke quietly while Tio cleaned a wound. "We will find who ordered this," he said. "We will show them they can touch our people." His words were promise and warning in one. "Isabella and my family." Her voice was steady but small. Marco's reply was short. "We secure them. You keep quiet. We work this." In the safe house that followed, Isabella slept on a narrow couch with the locket under her palm. Tio kept watch in the living room, his rifle across his knees. Marco closed his private office door and paced once, then 2 times, then set his jaw and sat at the desk. He opened a drawer and looked at a series of ledgers tied to the docks. The connection between the dead man and Moretti lines began to look less random and more like a cut intended to reach inside Isabella's world. The new lines of alliance were drawn in small, mechanical acts. Marco phoned a contact and gave a curt list of orders. Tio compiled a watch roster. Isabella made a single call to a housekeeper to tell her she would not return for the night. The decision spelled out control and protection in the same breath. Isabella realized the bargain would force compromises. She could already feel routine shifting. She had bargained for safety, and safety meant living under someone else's rules. A surprise appeared before dawn. Marco returned from his night surveillance with a short, concrete revelation. The rival crew had been hired by an unknown number traced to a shell company that used an address once connected to a Moretti competitor. The twist narrowed the field of who might want the dead man silenced. Isabella listened and then asked directly, "Do you think someone inside my father's company arranged this?" Marco looked at her without answering in full. He gave her a single line. "It's possible." Isabella's reply was sharp. "Then you will have to help me protect them without exposing my father to ruin." Her tone had a precision born of the girl who had learned to manage boardroom tensions without emotion. Marco's face did not soften, but he made a decision that showed a new line. He would shield the family from public investigation while he hunted the murderer himself. They planned a covert response at dawn. Tia would shadow the subcontractor sledges, Marco would confront a mid-level fixer, and Isabella would remain inside the safe house out of sight. Each person had a part. The plan moved not by speeches but by a list of actions typed into a phone and sent with curt captions. Isabella felt the mechanics of safety tighten around her like a well-made coat, functional but binding. Before the chapter closed, Isabella faced her choice again in one small concrete moment. She sat across from Marco at the safe house kitchen table. He folded his hands and studied her face. "If you stay with me, Isabella," he said, "you will be watched. You will have rules. You will not be free to walk the pier alone." He used her full name with a weight that felt binding. Isabella looked at her locket, then up at Marco. She thought of her father's face and the shipping manifests that could be pried open by a prosecutor if she told the police everything. She felt the locket warm where her thumb rested. "I will stay for now," she said. Her voice did not tremble in the way it had under the gunfire. It was practical, like a ledger entry. Marco nodded and rose. He walked to the window and looked out at the neon-lit water. His silhouette was dark against the amber waterfront lights. He did not speak. Then the house phone rang sharply, cutting the quiet. Tio answered and his voice tightened as he listened for a moment. "They have a car at the pier," he said, still idling. Marco's jaw tightened. He moved to the door, keys in hand. Isabella rose too, clutching the locket so hard the chain creaked. The chapter ends with a sound and a decision that will push the story forward. Marco closing the safe house door behind him and stepping into the night where a rival car waited under the waterfront lights. The choice Isabella had made, temporary protection under Marco's roof, now required immediate action. A board of the boathouse door snapped under a boot and a voice barked, "Search the engine rooms. She's here." Fear pushed Isabella's ribs out of rhythm before she could think. She was wedged against the metal ribs of the outboard engine, knees pressed to oil-stained flooring, one palm clutching the pearl locket beneath her collar. The first intruder kicked the hanging canvas aside and a flashlight slice landed on her shoe. Someone muttered, "Check under the benches," and footsteps closed the distance. The immediate problem sat concrete in the room. Men with masks were looking for her because she had seen a man fall on the pier. They had found Marco's boathouse and they wanted the witness. That fear hardened into suspicion as Isabella tried to slow her breathing. Suspicion moved her fingers to the small scar by her right eyebrow, an old habit when she tried to make sense of danger. She heard a secondary set of voices outside, low, controlled, an arrival not on their side, and then a second sound, the heavy footsteps of two men who belonged to the other kind of order, Marco's men. The notes from earlier nights, the rifle crack on the boardwalk, the wrong grab on the pier that shoved her into a waiting car, clicked into place as real threats again. She pushed the locket flat against her chest until she could feel its cool curve through cashmere. A man with a dark jacket brushed past the engine and nudged the metal with his flashlight. Isabella held her breath and pressed her back harder into the engine block. A phone slipped from a pocket into a small puddle of oil. Its screen flashed briefly, and in that flash a face was visible, her face, before the screen went dark. That single flicker was the moment she knew the searchers might already have a lead. She pinched the locket with both hands and tightened her chin. A second external event. The boathouse door slammed from the outside as two solid figures moved through the wet dock. Marco Santoro's coat hit the doorway before Marco did. He took in the broken board and the lamp, glare with his head tilted, eyes slow. "Marco, Isabella, where are you?" Isabella whispered. In the engine, by the coil, her voice came out thin. Marco's answer was a footstep heavy with presence, then Tio's boots scuffing by the cabin door. Marco moved like someone who measured every second against danger. He reached the engine with a hand already touching the side net at his throat without thinking. Stay still. Tio, sweep starboard. His tone carried the command of an owner and the carefulness of a man who would not bruise a woman unnecessarily. The next event unfolded quickly. Two of Marco's men collided with three masked intruders in the main room. A fist hit wood, a lamp crashed, and a knife slid across wet floorboards. Isabella crawled, slow and deliberate, away from the open phone. She remembered the rifle crack on the boardwalk, how the night had split there, and how she moved to look even though danger felt stupid and magnetic. Now, with Marco's silhouettes moving and Tio's shadow sweeping, she let suspicion shift into calculation. Was this break in a search for her alone, or had someone wanted to threaten Marco through her? The new question pulled at her. She bit her lower lip and forced her hands not to tremble. Marco's voice came from 2 steps away. "Who sent them?" he asked. "Did you see a face on the pier?" His question was direct. Isabella answered with facts. "A man, a rifle, he fell near the boardwalk. I tried to go help. I saw." She stopped because saying names felt dangerous. Marco's jaw tightened in a way that wasn't anger as much as a calculation. Tio returned with a portable monitor and an extension cable. He set it on a crate and fed footage from a dock camera. They watched a clip of neon puddles and a man walking, then the rifle flash, then a figure moving fast away from the railing. Tio rewound until a hand came into view, a flash of metal on a finger where a signet might catch light. Tio, freeze on frame. He tapped the screen. "Look at the ring." Isabella leaned forward, the engine under her scraping her knee. The screen showed a ring catching neon, thick and old-fashioned. She had seen that signet before in late arrivals, the glint that sat with men who belonged to families. Her certainty that Marco protected her faltered. She had trusted the man who had grabbed her on the pier, assuming he wanted to keep her safe. Suspicion flowed into fear again. What if the threat and her protector wore the same mark? Marco watched the frame for 3 long seconds, then said, "That could be one of mine, or copied. Or Santini tried to frame us." Tio's hand rested on Marco's shoulder. "We done know yet?" A question arrived from outside the boathouse. A firm knock at the marina gate and a woman's voice, Detective Elena Alvarez. "State protection, open up." The knock introduced an official alternative. Take the legal route and expose everything, or remain under Marco's immediate shield and accept his dangerous private rules. Isabella realized that choice held consequences for more than her. Her family name, the papers they kept, the charity trustees who trusted her. She felt the pressure of having to decide with inadequate information. Isabella pushed herself from the engine and walked into the main room, shoulders stiff. Detective Alvarez is here." Marco's face didn't change much. His mouth flattened. "Elena has a badge, Izzy. She offers a witness program." Detective Alvarez's arrival changed the scene outwardly and inwardly. Elena Alvarez stood on the dock with her coat buttoned and a badge visible above a folder. She spoke to Marco with professional directness. "Ms. Moretti can file a statement. We can move her to secure housing under the witness program. She won't have to stay with you." Marco's reply was blunt. "Keeping her here is faster. Running paperwork takes time." If you leave now, they will come back. Elena's hands brushed the folder's edge. Marco, you know 2 things. First, you can promise state protection. Second, witnesses end up listed in police records, Mies. Moretti's name would be in public filings. Is that what you want for her? Isabella heard both men. Her thinking narrowed to a list of facts. State protection meant official records and likely press. Staying with Marco meant immediate, sometimes violent safety and no paperwork. She felt suspicion tilt into distrust, first of the signed men who burst in, then of anyone who suggested an easy answer. Her decision would not be abstract. It would expose who shielded her, and who would be allowed to move against her. Tio cut in fast and practical. If she files, Santini will know it's a police route. They'll press their advantage. If she stays here, we can disappear her for a day and move her later, Elena replied, hands steady on the folder. You can disappear anyone for 24 hours. The law gives a paper trail. The trail protects witnesses. Hiding without that paper trail is risky. Isabella saw Marco's palm close under his coat, where the signet rested. He looked at her without pronouncing a single protective promise. That quiet examination made her feel both exposed and noticed. She realized a different emotion rising, curiosity mixed with anger. Anger at being chosen for other men's calculations. Anger at having her life become a bargaining chip. She chose. Her voice was small. I want to go to the police right now. Elena's eyes flicked to Marco, then to Tio. On what basis? Elena. Isabella answered with a concrete reason. Because if I go, my name goes to paper and my family's charity board will be dragged into headlines. My brother's work, people will ask. I cannot risk that tonight. Elena didn't press the moral argument. She gave a professional assessment. You know the risks. If they find you, come to us immediately. We'll arrange evacuation and external escalation. Santini's enforcers arrived at the dock with more men than before. They hit the pier like a wave. A hand grabbed the railing and a bottle rolled off into the water. Tio threw himself forward without hesitation and took a planted blow meant for Isabella. She watched his shoulder go down under force and heard a crack of bone or joint as he fell. That sight pushed her through a new emotional shift, from anger to fierce protectiveness. Her hands went immediately to his wound. She tore a strip of her cashmere to press against the bleeding cut. Tio hissed, "Get back, Izzy." Isabella refused. She held the cloth and met Marco's eyes. The look between Marco and Tio was not friendly banter, it was orders and understanding. Marco. Izzy, run. Move toward the dinghy and stay low. He stepped into the open under the neon, drawing attention like a deliberate target. Marco didn't shout. He walked with arms visible and his coat unbuttoned. That exposed him to gunfire faster than any hidden strategy. The climax came under neon and salt mist. Santini's lieutenant barked into a radio and then charged. Marco walked toward him and the water's edge like someone putting himself on a scale against consequence. He traded words, short, hard lines with the lead attacker. "Take me or leave her," he said. "Decide now." The man spat. "You think you can bargain, Santoro?" He raised a hand. In an instant there was a violent exchange. A knife flashed, gunshots cracked into timber, and Marco's leather coat took a round that tore through fabric and grazed muscle. He moved with a deliberate limp and caught a hard elbow that knocked him sideways. Marco's arm bared a bruise, and he answered the man by bringing him down with a decisive, controlled violence that left no room for argument. Isabella watched every move until her lungs stopped acting on their own. She had to stay low, just as Marco her. Tio staggered and then pushed her toward the dinghy. Go. Now Isabella shoved away from the dock ladder, fingers icy on wet rope. She could still see Marco through the neon haze, blood darkening his shirt, his jacket unbuttoned to reach for the wound. He pinched his lip and anchored himself to the pier with a hand around the railing. He was no longer only a frightening figure. He was someone who had chosen his body as a fence between her and violence. On the dinghy, engines coughed and then turned. Isabella's fingers released the locket, and she felt its warm weight falling against the palm where it had rested the whole night. A new emotion came up, relief braided with guilt. She did not know whether to be grateful for Marco's sacrifice or ashamed that he had become a shield on her behalf. She gripped the rope, and the boat pulled away from the pier with a steady, low sound. Marco's decision changed the direction of everything. In a curve of action and consequence, Santini's men retreated with curses and threats, carrying one man who could no longer stand. Tio lay on a crate, breathing hard, and Marco walked back to him and crouched with the same carefulness he'd once reserved for a fragile artifact. He tore a strip of leather from his glove and wrapped Tio's shoulder with precise hands, no tenderness wasted, only need. Isabella steadied the dinghy and looked back. Marco's silhouette stayed on the pier, a smoking shape with neon hallowing his shoulders. Detective Elena Alvarez stood near the marina gate, phone lifted, observing and making notes. She stepped toward the dinghy as it drifted, and she said, "Mies. Moretti, you must come with us to make a statement when it is safe. We can escort you." Her voice was a flat rope of professional calm. Isabella answered with the practical truth she had decided earlier. "No, I can't go to the papers." "Not yet." Elena hesitated, then handed Isabella a small card. "If anything changes, call me. If you're endangered, call me now." The immediate danger faded beneath the wake. The boat's engine thunked and softened. Tio breathed through gritted teeth. Marco climbed aboard the dinghy, when Isabella refused to leave it, slipping in with a steady, deliberate movement that made the craft list briefly. His jacket left a wet smear on the vinyl bench. He didn't speak much on the ride back. When he did, his voice stayed low and precise. "Tell me everything again." Isabella him the same facts she told before, but with new clarity. The ring on the shooter's hand, the rifle flash, the man falling at the boardwalk, the face she had seen in the phone flicker. Marco listened, head tilted, a thumb worrying the family signet. Each time she came to the detail about the ring, his jaw moved as if testing a memory. They reached the yacht hull at sunrise. The air smelled of diesel and salt. Tio's wound had been tied, but still blood a thin red onto white cloth. Marco guided them into a quiet corner of the boat. He sat across from Isabella and placed something on the table. A small, flattened envelope with photographs clipped to the top. He slid them toward her. Isabella saw the shooter in the photographs from a different angle. The same ring, the same gait, but in one frame the shooter touched the brim of his hat, and a close-up revealed a faded engraving inside the band. Marco's lips tightened. Santini's lieutenant uses that engraving. It's dumb, but it's theirs. That new detail forced another emotional shift in Isabella. Doubt to clarity. The shooter was not necessarily Marco, and the ring was a trace. She felt relief, like a physical loosening. She also felt anger that a mark could be used by more than one side, and that names could be traded like currency. Marco watched her respond and said, "I don't owe you explanations, but I will tell you this. I did not order hits tonight. I ordered protection." Isabella's reply was small and immediate. "Then help me make sure Santini doesn't use my name." Her voice held resolve now. Fear had become a working thing. She placed the pearl locket on the table between them and opened it. Inside was a photograph of her father closing the charity gate years ago. Marco took the locket with gloved fingers and pried the clasp gently with calloused thumbs. He looked at the face inside and then back at her. Tio added a practical proposal. "We can move her records. A false transfer to a safe house, then we slip her out on a ferry under an alias for a week. Elena can cover travel if she wants to risk the paper trail. Or we keep her here with rotating watches for now." Elena put a finger on the envelope. "I'll run a quick background on the charity. If it's entangled with public trustees, it's complicated. But I promise this. If she names Santini's man, we'll file and move." An unexpected twist appeared in a layered way. When Marco examined the engraving on the ring again, he found a set of initials not Santini's, but those of an offshore lawyer who sometimes worked with both families. That name signaled something specific and concrete, paperwork crossing lines instead of a clean family vendetta. It meant the conflict was rooted in money movement and legal cover, not only territorial violence. Isabella realized the threat was less about her single witness testimony and more about contracts and ledgers that a public statement might expose. That realization produced fear again, but this time edged with agency. She would have to decide how much of her family's life to put through public scrutiny to break the ledger trail. Marco's stance shifted too. He listened for longer, then said, "We trace the lawyer. We find the paper that links Santini to that contract. We cut the source." Isabella felt something like cautious trust forming. It was not easy. It was a choice measured in steps. Disclose details when it mattered, trust a man who had once grabbed her in a mistake, and guard family reputation. That trust grew through action, not words. Marco's hands on Teo's wounds, the way he had stepped into gunfire, the care with which he held the locket. They moved through a day of small, concrete decisions. Elena arranged a quiet call with a records clerk who would check offshore filings. Teo slept briefly, jaw clenched. Marco made calls that sounded like business but were not. He ended one call by saying, "Watch the docks tonight. Close the inbound logs. No one leaves without me knowing." At noon, an external event. A courier arrived with a sealed envelope bearing a Santini crest. Marco slit it open with his thumb and found a single photograph. Isabella on the pier, taken from a distance on the night. She saw the rifle flash. Someone had more surveillance than she knew. The photograph was a warning and a confirmation. The person who sent it wanted to remind them that the witness could be tracked. Isabella's reaction was immediate. She stood knuckles white on the table and said, "Who sent this?" Her voice trembled, not with fear this time, but with controlled anger. Marco set the photograph down and said, "Someone who wants us to panic. We'll catalog it and respond." His response was methodical, and that steadied her. The rest of the day moved toward a deliberate plan. Elena would open a limited paper trail, while Marco's men worked to find the lawyer connection. Teo would get a medical check and a secure perimeter. Isabella would rehearse a statement that revealed only necessary facts, not family names. Each choice changed the map of risk. Evening settled with more men at the marina but fewer immediate threats. Marco and Isabella sat on the yacht's hull while Teo slept in the cabin. The sun slanted low and the paint smelled of varnish and oil. Marco touched the locket with the same light pressure he'd used on other small private tasks. "Why didn't you go to the police earlier?" Isabella answered simply, "Because my brother's work can't survive headlines. Because my name is tied to more than me. Because I didn't trust the process with my whole life on it." Her sentences were short and exact, each reason a concrete object. Marco nodded. "Then we'll make the process work without exposing your family more than necessary. I can promise perfect safety. I can promise we will not let Santini find you by chance." She looked at him. "Why protect me?" He paused, then said, "Because you were where you shouldn't have been, and the world hit you for it. Because you are not a pawn I want broken." The final shift came by action rather than talk. 2 days later, Marco's men produced the lawyer's ledger, bank slips showing transfers, and a stamped receipt connecting Santini to offshore accounts. Marco stood at the table while Elena faxed copies to a secure prosecutor's office. The prosecutor agreed to read the file and begin an investigation that would move slowly but surely. The evidence made Santini's reach visible and legal. Isabella watched the prosecutor's paperwork being prepared. She felt the weight of having chosen a path that risked public records. She also felt resolute. She had decided to trade private safety for a legal line that could end the ledger as secrecy. Her fear had been a compass from the start. Now it guided her toward action. In the final hours before leaving the marina, Marco took the pearl locket from his pocket and closed it with his thumb. He looked at Isabella without theatrics and said, "You will stay with me until the prosecutor moves." You will have shifts of protection and a different name on the manifest. You will not take public appearances. You will call Alina if you make any move, Isabella answered with a single, practical sentence. I accept the terms. She handed him the locket and then, without a theatrical pause, stepped toward the hatch to lock the boat behind them. The last image of the chapter is concrete and actionable. Isabella places the pearl locket into Marco's gloved hand and closes the hatch to the boathouse, sealing a temporary shelter and a fragile agreement into the morning light. The chapter ends on that hinge, a door closed, an envelope filed, a wound tended, and an agreement made by action. No promises of destiny are spoken. The harbor keeps its ledger, and the people who move within it now carry new names on a new list. Isabella's choice is set on a physical table, the locket warm in Marco's palm, and the yacht's hatch thudding shut behind them.